So in recent days, we've learned that the PFA have got involved at Chelsea with the situations of Raheem Sterling and Axel Disasi. Two senior players, both on long-term contracts at the club, have been told by Chelsea coach Nedum Onuoha they have no future. They've been training away from the first team squad. Raheem Sterling posted a picture on Instagram last week of him training at 8 o'clock at night. He's got a young family in London, but he's having to train at kids' bedtime, I guess. So it's not been easy for Sterling or Disasi. Now, before we discussed with Nedum Onuoha, who had a similar situation at Man City, Nedum, what do you feel about the treatment of Sterling and Disasi, and also the 5 players at Man United this summer who were also forced to train away from the first team?
So I think it's really quite poor, to be honest. And I think of it like that in so many different ways, because firstly, it's not just happening at Chelsea, it's not just happening at Man United, it's happening elsewhere, all around the country, but the stories don't necessarily get told because they are very easy to be forgotten about, those types of players, because we spend so much time worrying about, starting 11, subs, transfers and so on. But in reality, there's a lot more to it. And I think when you hear that, someone like Sterling's training at 8 o'clock, yes, people say, well, if I'll train at 8 o'clock for this amount of money and so on and so forth. Well, in reality, you get the most joy from yourself as a professional when you're doing your job, when you're playing for your team. Best case scenario is when you're training with those peers, these are your friends. You're playing games of football, you're playing while you're winning games and so on. But when you are in a position to where essentially you know that you're training at a time which is almost designed to inconvenience you, to cause you to make a decision which you shouldn't necessarily have to do, I don't really like that. And I think my perspective, because when I talk about my side of things, this is from 2010, early 2010s. The PFA is lightly stepping in now. I think this is something that should have been taken out of, say, the pro game, in my opinion, from a long time ago. Because I think players, they don't really have as much leverage as people believe that they do. And the clubs essentially do. And they'll say, but we're allowing them a chance to train and so on. But there's so much more to it than that. And to also mention the point that you said right at the start, there's not even a guarantee that those players have been told directly by Nedum Onuoha that they're not part of the plans. Very often it's told by other people. And the players don't even get a chance to speak up and try and deal with it and have a one-to-one conversation. It's more a case of, well, somebody tells me that I'm not allowed to be here anymore, so I'm going to go elsewhere. And at that point, where's your head at?
I mean, obviously, Maresca was pretty cutting in his remarks last week. He was asked about it, and he said, my dad's been a fisherman for 50 years, and I'm not quite sure what the relevance of that was, but, you worked for an Italian manager, had similar kind of hardline methods. Roberto Mancini. Do you see some sort of comparison between Maresca and Mancini at the moment?
Right now, I think in some ways, yes. I think from the start of the season, or in fact, it was the start of the last season, there was so much discussion about Chelsea have got too many players. But Maresca was like, not really. I'm going to work with X amount of people, and that's all it is. Now, if you're part of that group of people, then great. But if you're not, it doesn't feel like he's somebody who would even consider bringing you back into that mix. And obviously, clubs can have too many players, but it also doesn't mean that you have to separate them in a manner whereby, the players don't even see each other, because that's something that gets done, which again doesn't really get spoken about. Some of the times, the players who are outside of that group, they get told that they can't come into the training ground until the other group are finished. Well, what's the reasoning for that? It almost feels like it's hard to not take it personally. And again, to put it into perspective, when you find yourself in that sort of group, if it was due to discipline, then you can kind of deal with it a bit better. But some of the times it's just because they say, well, we maybe you earn too much money, maybe you're not really part of my plans. But why does that mean that should now be held against you in a manner which means that, as I say, you end up suffering a little bit more, well, not a little bit more, a lot more as a player. So yeah, with Mancini, with Maresca, with some of these other managers, it's disappointing because you feel like you lose that human side. And if you've had it before from that same manager, that gap in the middle is something which almost at times you can't help but breed resentment towards the man in charge.
And have you noticed as well that when this situation happens, the fans never seem to take the side of the player? No matter what the situation is, it's always the club is right. And I think, we've had a summer whereby, Alexander Isak, Johan Visser have caused controversy by, I wouldn't go so far as saying going on strike, but making it clear they want to leave. And the players have turned them. But the flip side is a club can treat a player really badly, as the situation we've seen this year, that a contract means nothing if the club wants to get rid. So when fans say, they're being well paid to do the job, they're being disloyal to want to leave, where do you sit on that?
Yeah. So I am essentially quite heavily pro player. And I know that lots of people are almost against that, with the way that Isak did what he did. And so many people saying, Isak's gone about it the wrong way. You should look at the way that Gay did it and so on and so forth. But I think essentially each player is different. Each player has a different level of leverage within their football club as well. And I am a believer that loyalty is a great thing but it's even better when it goes both ways. And I think sometimes for players that I've seen across the years, when things are going well, the club seems super loyal to them. But the moment they want change, then everything changes with that. All of a sudden, it's like, no, you go train here. Oh no, we'll say, oh yeah, you can go. We can do this. We can do that. So with that in mind, there are lots of players who do everything they can to almost protect their own interests. Like if they want to get a move and the club aren't going to allow them to do it, well, what do you do now? Are you trapped? Are you actually trapped in this contract of employment? The chances are you're probably not. So you hear stories about people maybe kicking up a fuss in training and so on. I think the exact situation with him essentially going on strike, like that's as clear a message as you can see. And that bridge was done. There was never going to be a position whereby he was going to be there in September. But the other side of his Newcastle then ended up getting like over £100 million for a player that didn't want to be there. That's a deal which I think seems pretty good for both parties, essentially. So yeah, I am more pro player. I think my issue at times is that narrative can always be led by the clubs, and the clubs will also then be believed by supporters because that's what they've done for the majority of their lives. But the more players that you see, the more players that I played with, and the more stories that I saw, from a young person thinking that everything's very straight, everything's very cut and dry, I just want to be here, just do this, just do that. You start to realize that people are on journeys whereby different methods are needed for different moments. And I'm not against everything because essentially if I was in the same situation, maybe I'd do the same thing. So
Raheem Sterling's got 2 years left in a contract, reportedly worth £300,000 a week. Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Why didn't he just take a pay cut and go to Fulham or to Brentford and play for 50 grand a week? He wants to play.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, actually. Firstly, because as a sort of like as a player or as somebody who's earning any particular type of money, firstly, do you have to take a pay cut? You love football, but do you have to take a pay cut? Because essentially Chelsea have, if we're talking about Raheem Sterling as an example, obviously we could talk about Disasi and so on. If Chelsea said that this is how much they can afford to pay you as a player, then that's essentially what your value is as a player. Okay, well, fine. Well, we can't afford to pay that anymore. You need to go elsewhere. How many teams immediately have a big interest in terms of, say, trying to bring in Raheem Sterling? They'll probably say, well, it's too expensive. So does Raheem Sterling have to go around the club saying, listen, don't worry about how much that costs now. I'm going to come in for less. At a point where Sterling is probably approaching the point in his career where earnings are potentially maximized as opposed to going the other way. Okay. I think for me, the bigger topic, which goes beyond the money itself, because nobody knows how much he wants, how much he expects, how much he needs, and so on, is the fact that, like, especially as you get older, the decisions you make about where you play a lot of the times are dictated by external factors like family, for example. Like, where are you going to find the most happiness for yourself as a player? Because you could say, oh, I'll take a tenth of my salary and just go and play anywhere in particular. Like, well, listen, we all love football, but the more you play, the more you realize how much of a job it is, especially with the bad experiences that sometimes come with it. So yes, it's not that simple. And I think the clubs themselves don't necessarily make it that simple either. He will want to play, but he'll want to play at the right place because he's currently at the lowest point he's had in his career to date. So why should he pursue something if he knows that isn't, or if he believes that that's not necessarily going to make him any happier either?
No, listen, I was playing devil's advocate. I agree. I think that, if a club wants to get rid of a player who's on big wages, it's their mistake. They're having to rectify. It's not the mistake. Yeah. Their mistake is giving them the contract in the first place. But I mean, let's talk about your personal experience because, first of all, when you're basically moved away from the first team group by the coach or whoever, how are you told? Are you told, or is it just a case of like you just find out?
Yeah, so my situation, this was, this was Roberto Mancini in the 2011-12 season. And it was 2 days before pre-season was about to begin. And I got a message from someone who was essentially the club secretary saying that, like, don't come into training on the Monday, come in on the following Saturday. So, naive me initially thought, oh, brilliant, they've pushed pre-season back and have a little bit more time off. And then a moment later, I was texting, I think it was like Sean Wright, Michael Richards and so on. No, they were starting their training on the Monday. And they were training Monday through Friday, then flying to the US on that Friday. And then myself, I think it was Wayne Bridge, Roque Santa Cruz, Craig Bellamy, Manu Adebayor, possibly one more. We're going to be training with basically the youth team. And the youth team that didn't really train at Carrington normally anyway. So that was a weird moment and a weird sort of like entry into the season because at that point, like, what do you do? Do you just turn up on that Saturday or do you say, no, I'm going to come in on the Monday and try and talk to the manager? Well, no, they've made the decision. You're not part of these plans. And look how late in the day it was as well. We're talking 2 days before the pre-season's about to begin. So anyway, we came in the following Saturday, realized we were training with 16, 17-year-olds. Is this really going to be helping us? Absolutely not. Is it going to be helping them? Probably not either. I remember there was a kid, a centre-half, who looked like he was going to be a really, really good player. After 1 month of having to train against Emmanuel Adebayor, the kid lost all his confidence and he was back at the academy again. So this is like destructive from their side of things as well. We're inconveniencing them. We've now got a coach who's good at coaching kids. He's having to coach people who aren't too dissimilar to his age. You know, it gets a little bit weird, gets a little bit awkward. But anyway, we trained through the preseason, and this is the summer where Balotelli did the back heel in America. So there's a bit of a controversy around that as well.
He was going to join the week after.
Yeah, exactly. But they made it back. And I remember them coming back and thinking, okay, I'm still here. We're all still here. Okay, we're training at the same time. It's good to see them again, because I never appreciated the value of being with your peers on a day-to-day basis until all of a sudden you're not with them anymore. So they made it back, but we were still training with the younger group. And one day in particular, our training session of the second team, wow, I don't even know what we're called. The ones just aren't required. We finished the training session, and the team that travelled to the US for pre-season were training on the other side. So myself, and I think it was Craig Bamley, went over, sat down on a couple of footballs and watched the training session. Probably the worst decision of my entire career, because that evening we get a text message through again from the secretary saying, from tomorrow, do not come in to train at the normal time, which is like 10:30. Come in at 3 p.m. And again, you're like, 3 p.m. What's happened there?
And just before you go on, Nedum, just to put the context as well, I know where Man City's training ground is, just off the M60 near the Trafford Centre.
Yeah.
3 p.m. to people don't realise is the beginning of the rush hour. You're stuck in traffic. 10:30 in the morning is fine. You can just breeze in, but it's the inconvenience of having to get to the traffic, and your kids might be leaving school at that time. Yeah. Just the whole point, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's that the inconvenience is the point. And like they basically tried to make it clear that like they didn't want us to be at the club anymore, but it didn't necessarily need to be in those terms. And it only came because all of a sudden we're watching their training session. And the 3 o'clock was also very significant because they knew, or rather the manager knew, that was the latest point that anyone would ever be at the training ground who'd done a training session in the morning.
Right.
So now we were fully separated, fully separated, having very different experiences. And as I look back now, like, I think what a messy situation for us as like first teamers, but also like, how about those like youngsters who thought they were having a nice, sane pre-season until all of a sudden they're so burdened with these players who the club really don't want there. And you having your ups and downs. Like, I remember at the very start of that pre-season point, Emmanuel Adebayor, like, you know, of Arsenal, Man City, Real Madrid, all that, he was really calm at the start of it. And then towards the end of it, you could see he was broken. And I don't blame him for the stuff that we were doing and how we were doing. Just mentally, just couldn't keep coming in at that time anymore. Like, he was trying to work on his craft and so on, but like, he's not testing himself. He's playing against like kids. And of all those kids, I think maybe 2 or 3 of them maybe played at the high sort of level. But the rest, like, I don't even know if they're still playing to this day. So,
have you got an agent this time? So, are you trying to get out? Or are you a player that, I mean, you know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, everybody had agents. So, are you trying to get out, or are you just confused by the whole situation?
Well, it's both, really. I have an agent, but I'm confused by the whole situation. And I think for myself, something that I tried to do throughout my career, whenever I say I wasn't starting, is I'd want to try and prove the manager wrong. And I would try and do that by, say, work I do in training and so on. So now you're in this position where, like, you're helpless to it. And a story which really stuck with me as well, which really emphasized that point in a negative manner, was like, one of my favorite players growing up was Patrick Vieira. And he happened to come to City for maybe a year, 18 months, if that. One of the nicest guys I've ever met in football. And he wasn't at his absolute peak, obviously, when he was at City with me. But I remember sitting next to him and he's telling me a story about how he was at Inter Milan, I believe it was. And at the start of the season, he was told that he wasn't going to be part of their plans. I'm pretty sure Mourinho was the manager. He said he wasn't going to be part of their plans, but he's allowed to train with the team while he looks to find an option. And if he does well, who knows? By the start of the season, he was starting for Inter Milan. And I thought to myself, like, why can't that be a thing? Because you can be unwanted and still train with the first team. But when you then get taken away, all it does is breed resentment. And I think for some clubs as well, they try and save themselves money, because if a player, requests to leave and so on, then they lose all the money that they're entitled to on their contracts and so on. But why would you as a player want to do that and give a club a favour when they've put you in a situation whereby you now dislike how they're treating you? So yeah, it doesn't make sense really.
And if you're going in at 3 p.m, has the manager gone? I mean, do you get the chance to confront the manager and say, what's this all about? Has he gone?
No, you don't see anyone at all. And I think this is where there's sort of a difference, because the story I told about Vieira there, like, as I say, he spoke with the manager told him. When you have your coach in front of you, they can believe one thing, but you can at least try and sway them a little bit and show a sense of humanity, try and draw out a sense of humanity, because you're talking about what it means for you to still be part of that team. Talking about like if a manager says, oh, it's not going to work out, you need to find a club, you'll be like, okay, fine, you're disappointed, but maybe you'll try harder in training. Maybe you'll do everything you can, or maybe you'll just look for an opportunity. But when you don't even see them, it becomes this like mythical figure who's affecting your life from such a far distance that you can never get access to. And that's unfortunately how Mancini was. And I'm interested to see, say, whether it's at United or whether it was like at Chelsea, whether it was Maresca that told those players that they're going to be outside of it, or if it's going to be coming from somewhere else and they don't have access to the manager anymore. Because I promise you, that type of thing breeds huge, huge resentment. And that's not necessarily the type of feel that you want at a football club, because that person or those players who are now pushed to the side, they also have relationships with people who haven't been. So that even affects how they see the manager, because if it can happen to somebody that they believe in, why would it happen to them as well?
Can you tell me the story, Ned? I mean, we've discussed it before about international breaks, and you think you're going to get a week off, and then suddenly you don't.
Yeah, this one was particularly significant for me. So when the transfer window closed that season, I happened to still be there, and so was Wayne Bridge. I think a lot of the others had left. So he's now lightly reintegrating us into the team to where we train every so often. And then when it's a match day, like, we're not involved and so on. But we're still training with the team now, because basically the youth team are having to do other things. So Roberto was quite... He saw international breaks as being time for people to take a break, which is good, you know, if you have one of those managers, because some, maybe they go the other way. So it was September, it was October, it was the November international break, and players had been away. I think like Gael Clichy, for example, when he wasn't playing for France, he'd have like an extended stretch off. So it was like the Wednesday or Thursday before the last game before the international break. And the manager says, everybody, I'm on the training pitch, Wayne is on the training pitch, everyone's there. Everyone that's not going away on international duty, you will be off from, say, the Saturday until a week on Monday, because it's the last international break. And he said, this is the last one before March. So it's an important time to have your rest and to come back mentally and physically ready to go for this next tough period and so on. So I was like, great. Having the season that I had, I thought, okay, let me try and go away somewhere. So I booked to go away somewhere with my wife, a last minute trip away. And then I didn't make the squad for the weekend. But when the game was over, I got a text again from the secretary, never from the manager, saying, you've actually got training Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday of the week when he just told us previously that we were all off. And that was me and Wayne Bridge, nobody else. So I immediately tried to call the manager, rang 2 or 3 times, and then it got sent straight to voicemail. From then, it never rang out again. And I wasn't calling him to berate him. I was trying to call him to sort of ask why, and to almost express the importance of like why, you know, this could be a good thing for me to be being the same as everybody else. And you think that's bad enough in itself, but it wasn't, because from the Monday through to Friday, myself and Wayne, we trained with the reserves as such. But the worst bit was the Saturday, because on the Saturday, even the reserves were off. The reserves had the weekend off, and myself and Wayne and a fitness coach came in to do a gym session. And it felt like the most spiteful session I've ever had in my entire career. And again, that like brings, not like real, yeah, I suppose it did bring resentment, because it was a case of why. And I think for some managers, the best ones for me are the ones who can tell you a poor message, but deliver it in a softer sort of way, where they can understand how the decision they're making is going to affect you in a negative manner. But then the others who make decisions which will always be negative, but they'll never be the ones who will have to pass on that message. And they'll never give you the feedback to know why it's happening, and never do it in a time whereby you could maybe put a positive spin on things. And unfortunately, that's what Roberto was at that time. I don't know if he's still the same today, but that's what he was at that time. And again, like as a player, you can't help but build resentment. And people say, oh, but I'd do it for this amount of money, that amount of money. But these are like life-changing situations. And for me at the time, I'm lucky because I didn't have any children. But people like Wayne and others, they did. So these plans are affecting not just him, not just their partners and so on, but like their real day-to-day type life. And you go from having a routine where you train at this time and that's your job, to this whole other job, which is almost built around just making you as uncomfortable as possible.
So let's wrap it up with a bit of positivity, I guess. How did it end? And is there a message that you can say to the likes of Sterling and Disasi? Is the light at the end of the tunnel?
The light at the end of the tunnel, try and be positive. I think a lot of the time it's all about understanding the why. I think for Raheem, for Disasi, like they will have options, but they still need to make sure they pick the right one, because at times I've seen people just pick any option that comes up on the radar just because they're so desperate to get out. But before you know it, then you're in a situation going forward, which also isn't beneficial to you. I think they need to understand what they need from their next place of employment so they can potentially go somewhere and feel settled. Because, you know, at the moment, they're not even a talking point. You're talking about Raheem Sterling, who, you know, was playing for England like 4 years ago at the Euros and was a key player for them. Somebody who could potentially play for England again almost. So, and for Disasi, like, who knows, he's a young player who's just trying to establish himself in the English league as such. So I think it's more a case of, can you get a conversation with the manager? If you can get a conversation with the manager, I think your outlook could change. Because maybe then the manager is going to have to be apologetic to you to say why that you're not involved in the training group anymore. But you can then express your side of things so they can remember. Because like Maresca's played, you know, like remember how tough it is to be by yourself. Because it's great that, like, you know, you're a professional footballer, but having to bite your tongue and just get on with something which isn't beneficial to you. Like for Chelsea, listening to the talk is like, oh, well, you know, we're providing them with the pitch to train on and, you know, with kit. He's almost talking about them as if they're a free agent, you know what I mean? And they're looking for work somewhere. These are your players. So I think if they can find a way to sort of speak to the people who are in power, whether it's the manager and so on, maybe the outlook would change. And maybe the two parties can work together to try and find that move, instead of it feeling like one party saying, well, if you don't take this move, we'll make your life a living hell. But not every place offers that, but hopefully it does at Chelsea.
So how did your situation end, and did it end in a satisfactory way for you, or was it just to get out as quick as you can?
I ended up going in the January transfer window, and I went to Queen's Park Rangers. This was the season when City ended up winning the league for the first time. But it was strange because I was out of the mix. I'd played in a couple of like League Cup games and so on. And then out of the blue in the January, I made a squad. And then Mancini, the manager, brought me on. I think it was against Wigan. And he brought me on for the last 10 minutes because they had a lead and needed someone to come and shore it up at the back. 2 days later, they accepted a bid and I was sent on my way. So I think mine ended because as a young person, I remember the advice I got from my agent at the time. And he said, you can't waste a year in football because you never know how many you're going to have. So I had to find a solution. And I was lucky enough that the manager QP at the time was Mark Hughes, who was the last manager before Roberto Mancini came in. And I was playing week in, week out for Mark, basically. So that gave me an opportunity. And it wasn't like I was desperate to move to London or whatever, but I was moving to a place where I had a feeling that the manager knew what I was about. So I was going to get a chance to sort of redo my career, or at least get myself back on the pitch again with people who I've missed playing with and playing against. So it ended with a move. It wasn't necessarily the move that I wanted as such, because as a young person from Manchester coming through City's academy, playing for Man City, that's the only thing I ever wanted to do. But it's a reminder of the business of football. And in reality, sometimes you gotta try and find a solution. But thankfully, like City and myself found the right move for me in that moment.